Carnival Bulletin is worth twice as much as the year before, the year after, because of the significance of the procession.
Once purchased for a dime, Carnival Bulletins live on as priceless Mardi Gras memories.
The crew of Zulu Centennial was documented in a 2009 Louisiana State Museum exhibit. Diane Mack tells us about the Mardi Gras organization's very special anniversary.
This year marks the 100th anniversary of the Zulu Social Aid and Pleasure Club. To celebrate this auspicious event, Zulu teamed up with the Louisiana State Museum for a visually stunning exhibit that documents the history of the Carnival Club.
There are only a handful of crews that are actually old enough to have celebrated their 100th anniversary, and we were very pleased to be able to present Zulu's history in a large exhibition here at the Presbytery.
The installation of From Tramps to Kings was a challenge because of the many costumes on display, most of which are on loan from Zulu members.
In the exhibition, you can see a very clear evolution of the design of the costumes. You see this wonderful sense of pride that Zulu is taking in itself and its appearance on the streets, because the costumes, especially the very large collar pieces and headpieces that you see on the monarchs as well as the characters now, are meant to appeal to the parade-going public.
Getting the historical facts right in the Zulu Centennial exhibit posed a challenge that required the extensive research of Zulu's historian, Clarence Becknell. This former school principal helped set the record straight about the club, starting with its genesis from an organization known as the Tramps.
And the Tramps were made up of water parts of the city. There was a guy by the name of John Matoye. He had a brown bomber lounge. And a lot of these white-based groups, they would frequent this place. A group of them, about 25 or 50 of them, went to see a play by the vaudeville group, by the Smart Set Company. And there was a skit that was entitled, "There Never Was, Never Will Be a King Like Me." From that skit, that's when it came out and formed Organization Zulu.
The exhibit showcases Zulu's vital role in the community that even today goes beyond Mardi Gras.
The Baptist churches in the early 1900s created these benevolent societies, and these societies provide assistance to the families in need of burial expenses. When someone was ill, they just came to the aid. It was the first form of insurance in the black community, social aid and pleasure. There's a pleasure side to it as well as there's an aid.
The retrospective explores sensitive issues, including the crew's use of blackface makeup, a tradition that offended some African Americans in later years.
I love an organization, so I covered against Zulu because of the antics. They felt that the blackface was very demeaning, especially during the height of black awareness.
A section of the exhibit is devoted to Roy Glapion Jr., president of Zulu from 1976 to 1988, and a member of the New Orleans City Council before his death in 1999. Glapion credited with Zulu's renewal and growth following the crisis of the 1960s.
One of his goals was to change the image of Zulu, which it did, made it more respectable in the community. When he became president, it was about 69, 70 members. In the 80s, it went from 69 to 375.
Zulu's image makeover included the adaptation of African themes and the addition of other characters to the club's existing repertoire.
And of course, the characters all have their own individual floats in the parade. So the men who are honored to become these characters, whether it's the Big Shot or Mr. Big Stuff or the ambassador or the governor or the mayor, these are really important positions within the Zulu hierarchy. The early Big Shots always wore a derby hat, always carried a cigar. Some of the early Big Shots actually wore a ring on their finger that was made from a glass doorknob that was meant to look like a very large diamond.
And it was just out of fun and joke. These guys were very, very creative, even though they lacked the educational level, but they were very intelligent men.
One treasured artifact in the Zulu exhibit is a letter Louis Armstrong wrote in 1952.
It's Louis Armstrong in his own voice describing his experience, and we're displaying it now, all 4 pages, so that everybody can read this wonderfully humorous letter that really shows how much it meant to Armstrong to be King Zulu in 1949.
There are many one-of-a-kind items on display, including a dress designed by Bob Mackie for the 1977 Queen of Zulu, Jane Michel. The dress, which Michel wore in the parade, was paired with a headdress previously worn by Cher. And to get the official word on one of Zulu's most enduring traditions, Becknell recommends that visitors stop at the coconut shell. Zulu's historian believes that it's important for the public to hear the cruise side of the story.
That's what we want this exhibit to do. Tell the truth about the arguments, where it came from. Of course, we're not going to stop people from writing articles and write what they want to say, but this is it from our aspect of it. This is what we adopt ourselves. And no one can tell our story but us.
Masking and costuming have long been customs of the New Orleans Carnival. Steve Bellis looks back at some early Mardi Gras erupts.
Masks and costumes may have changed, but getting dressed on Mardi Gras itself to honor the King of Carnival remains a time-honored New Orleans tradition.
The origins of people masking on Mardi Gras are the essential ingredient of Carnival, and indeed always has been.
In 1835, visitor James Crucy seemed stunned by the spectacle. Human bodies are seen with heads of beasts, birds, snakes, and apes. Beggars, monks, and robbers parade and march on foot, horseback, wagons, and carts.
Most of the costumes, I think, were imported. I mean, there were obviously people here who were capable of making costumes, but there were quite a few shops that advertised their goods were from France. This mask is one of the oldest I've seen. It is from the 1880s, and there is an engraving that was, I believe, in Harper's that shows a very similar mask being uncrated and placed on a shelf. Again, cross-dressing. Of course, in those days, they weren't Cher or Donna, they were Grandma. The American population did not take part in it. As a matter of fact, masking was banned in the early years of American rule here. They were afraid of masks, period.
Newspapers in 1899 singled out women, pointing to a degree of immodesty exhibited by female maskers. To ward off attacks, women began to travel in groups, often brandishing whips or riding crops to keep protesters at bay. Heralding the arrival of the 20th century, Mardi Gras became more circumspect.
And of certain manners and a code of conduct that people followed at that time. So people wanted to dress up to honor certain individuals, and Rex was one of those individuals. As with the kings of other carnival parades, you'll find a certain number of people wearing costumes, but the great bulk of the people are wearing their Sunday best.
Still, masking and role-playing prevailed. In the 30s and 40s, popular culture, particularly movies, greatly impacted costume selection. Mardi Gras 1940 was a virtual parade of child stars. With the 1939 debut of Gone with the Wind, miniature Scarlett O'Hara's popped up everywhere, as did Rhett Butler's precocious Bonnie Blue, modeling her favorite outfits over and over again. Little Bo Peeps pranced about, most minus their sheep, while cowboys and cowgirls brought the Wild West to Canal Street. In the sea of tiny tots, clowns vied with diminutive Uncle Sams, all hoping to catch Rex's royal eye. There were high-octane babies and those who simply ran out of fuel. And while some of the mommies sewed long hours to create these Mardi Gras masterpieces, many of the costumes were mass-produced and locally available in stores like Maison Blanche, which advertised Disney Carnival costumes complete with masks for only $1. In the early 1950s, a young Stephen Moses enjoyed Mardi Gras with his family along the Uptown route. Despite a torrential downpour in 1953, enthusiastic crowds still gathered to greet Rex and his retinue, but a decline in masking had many concerned. Along with concerted efforts by the city and tourism officials, costume contests sparked a passion for street masking.
The Bourbon Street Awards, as we know it today, actually is one of the longest-standing costume competitions at Mardi Gras. It began in 1963. It has a bit of a rivaled character now, but for a long time it was actually an event that encouraged family participation, and there were children's competitions that were part of the Bourbon Street Awards as well in the 1960s and 1970s.
Today, the Carnival Costume Gallery at Presbyterian captures the look and the feel of Mardi Gras.
In fact, there were curators out on the street, Mardi Gras 1999, shopping for costumes, and the exhibition opened in early 2000. So it was wonderful to see here in the French Quarter, locals actually using this traditional material for very creative and oversized costumes that attracted a great deal of attention.
Everyone should wear a costume. It's one day. It's a day to become something or someone else. Your imagination is the limit. But it's that transformation and losing one's identity and joining a mass of revelry. And the mask is the passport.
For many years, the decision of what Rex organization maskers wear for their parade has been in the hands of one special designer. Meet Susu Kearney. And here to introduce her, Marcia.
As the designer of Rex float costumes for over 3 decades, artist Susu Kearney is one of the creative forces of Carnival. Now her work is being recognized by the Louisiana State Museum.
Here at the Presbyterian, we have a new exhibition called Continuing the Legacy, Carnival Costume Design, 1946 to 2008. And one of the designers that I most wanted to feature was Susu Kearney. Susu has a unique connection to Carnival, not only through her family, but because she has been the sole costume designer for the Rex Parade for over 35 years now.
Susu has ties to Rex organization through her grandmother, Elizabeth McGinnis, who was Queen of Rex and through her grandfather, Arthur LaCour, author of The New Orleans Masquerade, a book that is still regarded as an important Carnival reference. In 2001, her daughter Niquette was Queen of Carnival, wearing a dress designed by Susu. A talented artist with a degree in business and marketing, Susu was illustrating D.H. Holmes' training manuals when fate stepped in.
Her work for Rex began in about 1973 completely by accident, which is a story that I've heard over and over again from so many Carnival costume designers, how they get into the Carnival field by accident.
It's a good friend who was very instrumental in putting together the Rex organization as far as their ball and parade, came to me and said that they needed someone to help out at the last minute because the artist who was doing the costumes was ill. So I stepped in for that year, and he kind of told me what to do, said this is what we want the costumes to look like, and this is the theme. I was always interested in fashion and in clothes, but I had no idea I would end up with this.
Each Mardi Gras, Susu can be found on St. Charles Avenue, sketchbook in hand, critiquing the current Rex Parade and brainstorming for the next.
And what I have to keep in mind is that as the parade comes down the street, I don't want to have 2 costumes in a row that have the same color cape or, 2 similar golds or 2 similar pinks, something like that. So I try to space out my colors and make them in contrast not only on the float, but as they come down the street.
Each year she designs costumes for about 20 Rex-themed floats. Susu, who admits that she can't sew a lick, delivers her paintings to her seamstress in July, guaranteeing that the costumes will be delivered around Christmas. The nearly 600 original sketches donated by the costume designer to the State Museum show a clear stylistic progression.
I think that before I used to be a little bit more literal. If a float was to look like Little Red Riding Hood, I might make the men look like Little Red Riding Hood or the wolf, something like that, whereas now I would be a little bit more abstract.
Susu says she also learned the hard way to keep it simple.
One year I saw a man with a big pair of scissors cutting his fringe off. We found that if the as far as extra added things, fringe, sequins, or too much on the arm, the riders weren't comfortable. So I've eliminated a lot of that.
Later sketches include fabric swatches for costume pieces.
I try to use contrasting colors so that they emphasize the floats and they look really bright on the street so that the average person will just look at that float and say, oh, wow, isn't that beautiful? But they might not necessarily notice the costumes per se. They would just notice that the whole thing that went by was very striking and beautiful.
Artistic designer for the Rex Parade, Henri Schindler.
I've worked with Susu since the mid-1980s, and when I got involved, I was not particularly pleased with the palette of the float painting because there was a lot of spraying and the colors were a little muddled. And I remember telling her at the time, I said, Susu, my aim is to get the floats to be as bright and vivid as your costumes. Her designs, her fabrics, and the finished costumes really pop everything up a notch.
Susu says that after 35 years, her job is still fun and challenging.
I love this aspect of Mardi Gras, the behind the scenes, the artisans, the craftsmen, and I don't know where else in the world except maybe Europe where these ancient crafts are still used.
While Hurricane Katrina destroyed much of the Rex organization's den, thankfully some artifacts were salvaged and preserved by the hands of talented artisans. Living history is a fitting way to describe the Rex organization and its work. While for some folks, Carnival is only about the parade passing by, Rex is about preserving more than a century of New Orleans tradition. And much of that past has been kept inside Rex's headquarters on South Claiborne Avenue. And Rex's history now includes a chapter on Hurricane Katrina.